What are the industrial use cases of copper, and how much of this metal are industries and companies using today? Well, we're talking about this with author, investor, and CEO of CopperBank, Gianni Kovacevic. Gianni, welcome back. We spoke not too long ago about the copper price, and we're going to be drilling a little bit deeper today on the industrial side of this metal. So let me start off by asking you this hypothetical question. Suppose tomorrow all copper production were to cease. There's no more copper production. What would this world look like?
Well, people should know that of all the copper that's fabricated in the world today, 75% is fabricated into something to generate, transfer, or utilize electrical energy. So now that we go into hyperdrive, where everyone knows this already, like they used to debate, like, when is this going to happen, and is the automotive industry going to be pivoting? Are renewable energy schemes commercially viable? I think most people can appreciate that is all happening now in real time. And this is the decade where it starts to come to the fold. But what people really need to look at is, we saw Volkswagen's Power Day last week. How much copper have they procured for this plan? Well, none. That comes later, once the plants are retooled and built, and then they become a pervasive new buyer for copper for the next, really for that business, but let's say for the rest of this decade. And that's what your listeners should be pegging in on. What will the demand growth be? What can it be? And can the miners keep up with that?
Okay, let's talk about this demand growth. The steepest part of the curve, what's that going to be driven by?
Well, it all starts right now. So in America, if you buy copper cable at Home Depot, you've probably bought it from Southwire. They're the largest fabricator of copper in America. And I was at the site about 18 months ago, and it's just about 45 miles west of Atlanta, Georgia, and the world's largest rod mill is still there. And there's a saying, and I'm going to credit my friend John Gross. He says, if rod mill is not going in the door, there's no finished product that's going to come out the front door. Is Southwire's business going to be good for the rest of this decade? Absolutely, better than it's ever been, because if you're in the business of making cable or feeding for transformers or windings or for all of these different networks, it's going to be as good as it's ever been. They are 550,000 tons a year, America's largest single fabricator of copper, but they're not the world's biggest. China State Grid is the single biggest consumer of copper in the world. Now, the copper market is 25 million tons. To give people context globally. About 4 million tons is recycled copper, or what they call secondary, and the rest of it, 21 million, is primary copper, which comes from sulfide mines, 16 million tons, and copper oxide, 4 million tons. China State Grid uses just a whisker below 3 million tons of copper a year, but that's not the headline. Did you know, as part of China's 14th five-year plan, the spending of China State Grid starting this year is increasing by 50%, 50%. So if China State Grid is already using 3 million tons, I haven't done the calculus on it, but I'm willing to wager it's going to be better than 4 million tons this year. So yeah. Southwire, China State Grid, Orbis, Pirelli, Nexen Cable, Mitsubishi, around the world. It's going to get interesting. Where will they procure long-term reliable supplies of copper?
You're right to point out China, Gianni, because I'm looking at a historical price chart of copper, and in 2001, copper was trading at around 70 cents a pound, and it quickly rose to $3.8 a pound in a matter of 6 years. That's a huge growth in just a span of a couple of years, and I think that was closely tied to the China industrialization story. The major theme of the early 2000s, I recall, was China rising, double-digit GDP growth, industrialization at a pace we've never seen before. How much of that can we see today? Because China is shifting to a more consumerist economy.
Well, China is going through what's called right now the re-electrification of China. And that continues with this big investment of China State Grid, and they have 1 billion, 200 million customers. And they did achieve one of their old goals, which was to give every single household in China access to reliable electrical energy. That was achieved. In some areas, it was done in a bit of a clumsy way, a bit of an old technology way. But now they're going through this process, which culminates in really everything, not helicopters, not airplanes, but everything else they want in the medium to long term to be electrical energy. So the cycle that you're talking about, when copper was at its all-time low, 2001, and copper was 70 cents a pound. And if you talk to the people in the industry, and once again, I'll use Don Cox, his basic points. He did the keynote at PDAC all those years. And he talks about in 2003, as the copper price just ticked a little bit higher. And he was talking about China and more people consuming more things and how it'll be an unprecedented commodities boom. And it was. We saw that. It was something the world had never seen. It caught everyone off guard. But they themselves, many executives, didn't believe it. And he used the saying, he says, those that know it the best, love it the least, because they've been hurt the most. We have something similar right now where you talk about the engineering to enable what we already found. And we can talk about that in a second here. But when I talk about turning a resource into a reserve in copper, and if we look at all the things that we found in the past during that China super cycle, because we did spend tens of billions of dollars looking for more copper, the engineering is telling me you're going to see copper well above $10,000 a ton. And it's not the will. You got lots of that in Lima. You got lots of that in Santiago. It's the money, David. You cannot make this stuff work. And so when the copper price is at these elevated levels, because as we go to this electrification of the world, where are they going to want to choose? Which jurisdictions? Because geologically speaking, it's very scarce, copper.
Okay, let's talk about the supply side now. Perfect segue. We've talked about, in the industry, we've talked about peak oil, peak gold. Is there such thing as peak copper, Gianni?
Not at the right price. We found a lot of low-grade resources. So there's no real world-class deposits. But let's say hypothetically, copper today is trading at $4.10 a pound. That correlates exactly to $9,000 a ton. And when you look at that on the resources that I'm talking about, there's dozens of projects that are 0.3% copper and maybe 0.4% copper equivalent. And that's important because if you take a ton of ore, what's it worth? At $9,000 a ton, it's worth about $35. If it's 0.4, and it's worth about $27 if it's 0.3%. How can you make a project work? Location matters. So you have to ask a few questions if you're a copper mining company. Do you have a readily available workforce? Yes or no? Is your tailings going to be relatively straightforward or somewhat complicated and far away from the operation? Yes or no? Do you have, is your near tidewater? Or is it a high elevation? Yes or no? Do you have access to water, or are you going to have to desalinate the water and move it up to 3,000 or 4,000 meters? Yes or no? If you're answering no to all these questions, you have to pay for this. And that's where you're getting these $4 and $5 and $6 billion capex. Part of it is building the mine. The second part of it is all the other ancillary things that are required to operate a copper mine. And it tells me it's going to be pretty difficult, because when you look at dozens and dozens of feasibility studies or pre-feasibility studies, even at $9,000 a ton, it's going to be, it's either difficult at the margin, or it's not going to give the bankers enough confidence to finance these projects, which tells us, because demand's going to be good, people make these, the cable products are going to, his business is going to be like never before. I believe it will go there, and they will be able to convert these low-grade resources into reserves. To answer your question the long way around, we're not going to run out of copper as long as the copper price stays at a level that enables these companies to turn a resource into reserve. And the answer to that question, it's well in excess of $10,000 a ton, or over $4.50 a pound, or over the old all-time high, in my opinion.
Yeah, all right. Let's go back to the price one more time, Gianni. I'm looking at the price of, just take last year, for example. Why did it run up from $2.33 a pound to where it's at now? That's almost double, like an 80% increase in less than a year. I would expect during a recession, a pandemic, when everything's shut down, there would be less industrial activity. Well, there was, but for some reason, copper just skyrocketed. Why is that?
Well, we were really late into a bear market. When you're early into a bear market, you can do certain things, and inventory can be taken out, and people can always tighten their belts. We were 7 or 8 years into a bear market. So that was already factored in. So inventories were we were undersupplied. We were taking the last couple of years before COVID out of warehouses on or off warrant. And there was 200,000 or 300,000 or 400,000 tons a year always coming out. That game stopped. And then not only did demand fall off a cliff during COVID, but a lot of the mines shut down. They also had COVID closures. and a lot of production came offline, and they almost offset each other in some respect. And so now, when people realized that it wasn't as bad, maybe it wasn't going to be like a 10-year global shutdown, and then they started talking stimulus, but then the stimulus focused on green energy, and we're talking $10 trillion. And people could already start understanding. The POs already started to come in, and all of a sudden, what happened next? The speculator got involved. People that have no interest in fabricating any kind of copper. And they started taking out these 10s and 20 and 100,000 ton blocks of material from this alliance of miner and fabricator. All of a sudden came someone that actually had nothing to do with the copper fabrication business. And all that came together, and it created this supply scare. And I will submit to people that it was the speculators that were able to move the copper price well in excess of maybe where the fundamentals drove it. But now we are looking at where is the global economy going, and this money is going to start to be allocated. The China's 14th five-year plan, heavily to do with renewable energy and the re-electrification of China, and America, the stimulus programs, and of course it'll be in Europe and even some of the lesser economies in the emerging markets. They're all going towards a plan of electrification. And on top of all that, all these car manufacturers and all the charging facilities, and even some of the big energy companies, they're already doing these things, irrespective of everything I just talked about. They're all coming together like a pincer and creating at the margin way more demand than supply. So the price of copper, I believe, is going to continue to be very strong going forward.
Is there still a deficit right now as we speak? We're about a year into the pandemic.
Yeah, well, there's some of the material has come back to market, but we saw these weird spoofing in the aluminum market, where these huge quantities by a computer click are moved from not being visible to being visible, and that's not happening with copper. I think copper is something there's only 5 or 6 or 7 days of daily demand in global warehouses. It's not like the oil market. It's not like the aluminum market. And as I started, my first saying, if you don't have rod mill going out the back of your plant, you're not going to have any finished product going out of the front of it. And before hand to mouth may have worked, not anymore. I think people need to have a longer term vision and maybe a longer term grasp on supplies and what they're going to pay for the coming quarters.
Mm-hmm. One thing that also struck out to me is that while precious metals continued to fall since their high in August, copper was not the same story. It continued to rise, actually. So I'm guessing completely different fundamentals.
Copper's decoupled, right? And it's decoupled from actually the classic one is the oil decoupling, where I've been talking about this old energy decoupling from new energy, and copper simply has to rely on higher prices for engineering, dovetailed with what should be unprecedented demand. The oil market is not growing by 5 or 6%. It's anemic at best, and we may have even reached peak oil. So if you look at that 20-year correlation, which we always share, the oil to copper correlation, that is already broken down. And when you see copper at $4.50 or $4, I don't, other than politics, I don't see any reason that oil should be $120 a barrel. Just remember, last time copper was $4, oil was consistently over 100 at the same time. Those days are gone. The only thing driving that market is going to be politics. And can that happen? Absolutely. But copper's being driven overwhelmingly by fundamentals. So where's the opportunity for people watching this show? Let me give you some guidance on what I think is going to take place. Contrary to what many people think, there are only about 15 major companies that basically produce the big bulk of the world's copper, and then you get all the smaller companies. So really, it's the thinking of the 15 CEOs of these 15 companies. Where will they go? Because they are going to get a lot of pressure from their shareholders and from their board to grow reserves, because the business is going to be good and their share prices have done very well. So they're going to have to choose between, as we always talk about, higher elevation, countries that require AK-47 type protection, or as we like to say, or areas that don't have historical copper mining culture, or they're going to have to go back to historical copper mining camps. And why are they going to do that? Because remember what I just talked about? Tailings, water, electricity, readily available workforce. It's all there. So if you look at Arizona, what does it cost to build a 100,000 ton a day mill in the copper corridor compared to 3,000 or 4,000 meters in Peru or in Bougainville or in the Philippines? Well, it's a lot lower. Let me tell you, And I'm talking like $1 billion or $2 billion lower for the same metal output. So I believe that's where they're going to be going. And what will they pay? So we can look at in the China super cycle that you were talking about, there was over 30 transactions, and the average price, David, was between about 3 and 10 cents, more than that even, per established pound in the ground. So to be clear, if a project had 10 billion pounds, there would be they were paying on average between 300 million and $1 billion. That's kind of on the high end. I think there wasn't so many pounds involved with those big projects, right? So why are they paying this? They paid it last time because the cost to delineate a measured and indicated copper pound in the ground based on tens of billions of dollars of exploration and countless hundreds of resource estimations and studies is 4 cents a pound, David. That's what it costs. So to find that 10 billion pound copper porphyry on average, the days of, $100 million to delineate it, gone. We know from all these studies, it's on average 4 cents a pound. So will they pay, knowing that that's what it costs? And it takes 20 years to find a project from discovery hole to the bankable feasibility study. They want projects at year 15. And CopperBank is one of the few juniors that has a project in Arizona that, based on the historical economic studies, which they were done in 2013, we don't consider them to be contemporary, but they were done to a 43-101 standard, all categories, David. We've got 8 billion pounds of copper. So the 500 million tons measured and indicated is 0.44%. The inferred that we have, 480 million tons, is at 0.34%. That's important because those grades are actually higher than most of the in production stuff in the state of Arizona. So I will submit to people, is it plausible? Is it plausible? If they say it's going to cost us 4 cents times 8 billion pounds, about $300 million to find a project like that, could it be worth something like that in the future? And it's, you look at the historical market cap value of all the projects that we own in CopperBank, it's well in excess of $3 a share. And it cost them 2 cents a pound, the previous operators, to delineate these copper pounds. Yeah. We're trading right now, David, at less than 1/2 of 1 penny. So is CopperBank undervalued? I will submit to people we are. Owner operators, people can see how our share price has behaved. We do what we say what we do, and we are going to be moving forward some what I think are pretty exciting drill programs in the state of Arizona. And that's just one example. So you can use the CopperBank example against any of your favorite copper juniors. Where are they? How much infrastructure, water, readily available workforce are they going to have to implement to develop those projects? Is it a lot or is it a little? And that gives you guidance on what the CapEx will eventually should be. And are major miners going to want to endeavor to finish those projects off? Because you do not want to be with a junior that thinks they're going to be building a copper mine. That's a totally different skill set. So there's the people that delineate the resource. There's the people that discover the official hole, the discovery hole. And then there's those people that are qualified to build copper mines. We are custodians of our projects, and we believe that we have something that they're going to want. Okay. And that's how we're playing it. But people can use our market value, our costs, and where we are, and they can superimpose it against any other junior with an established advanced stage copper project anywhere in the world.
Excellent. Gianni, thank you very much for your update. I appreciate your time, as always.
Thank you, David.
And thank you for watching Kitco News. I'm David Lin. Stay tuned for more coverage.